I was stopped by Moose of Marauder, who's one of the founders of NEVA. And he was like, you have to talk to the commissioner. And I've been coming to the city for about 30 years, and I did not know who the commissioner was. And I've had these wonderful organizations with the commissioner now. And he is so, his name is Jeff Syracuse, by the way, so he has a name. And he is such an amazing force of good for creatives in the city. And to the extent he's actually the commissioner of the Nashville Music, Film and Entertainment Commission. So we're very lucky to have him with us this morning. And Jeff, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everybody. You know, we have another Jeff that's on the commission, but his last name is Gordon. So guess what his name is? Commissioner Gordon. Batman reference, right? So he's got a cooler name than I do. Well, it's so wonderful to be here this morning with you all, and it's especially an honor to give the keynote address, if you will, which I've never done before. And of course, being first thing in the morning, everybody has had their coffee, you're good and awake. So my hope and my challenge, I guess you could say to you this morning, is to get your brains turning, to get you thinking, and to challenge you about how this topic impacts you in your particular area, whether you're here from Nashville or whether you are from somewhere else. If you are not from Nashville, I would love to see a hand. Okay, that's great. That's a great mix. You'll find that, obviously what I'm talking about is my experiences here in Nashville, but you'll find that it applies all over the globe. It applies to cities in the US, it applies to cities in around the world. We're all going through similar things. So it's interesting, of course, that we're sitting here at the Mechanical Licensing Collective because it represents, I think, the epitome of collaboration and patience when we talk about the intersection of music policy making and the music industry. It took 20 years for the Music Modernization Act to pass. That was an extraordinary amount of patience. My grandfather used to say pazienza, which is Italian for patience, and he would say, Jeff, just when you think you've had enough, just when you think you're done, you've had enough, you're going home, you gotta go that extra little step. And you probably can imagine how many times that legislators, advocates had to do that over the course of 20 years to get to a point where a piece of legislation in Congress passed unanimously. Tell me when that's ever happened in my lifetime. It's pretty extraordinary. And so what we see here today is an extraordinary effort by so many advocates that has really strengthened the foundation of this entire industry. So obviously what I'm going to be speaking about today is a bit about local policy-making effort, how you all can engage in your local municipalities, and again, to be thinking about where are you in your own cities and local communities as far as community engagement, engaging with, yes, politicians, and figuring out how your city can become better and more conducive and create a thriving ecosystem for the working creatives. Now, I have some prepared remarks, but I've made them somewhat short so that we could hear, or I could hear from you. I would like us to have somewhat of an engagement here. I would love to hear from you. You will find that this is a process where it's constant collaboration where we all learn from each other. I've never been that politician that walks in the room and thinks, I'm the smartest guy in the room. Just the opposite. I've always said that the answers come from collaboration. And you'll also find here, as you hear my remarks, I'm going to be speaking about perhaps my experiences over the past 10 years. We just talked about the 20 years it took to create the Music Modernization Act. But you'll find that even here in Nashville, we are just beginning to start to address some of the issues that are impacting Nashville to a great degree, where we try to find in a very data-driven way what we can do to not just make sure that working creatives can survive here, but that they can thrive. So let me read my remarks and then be thinking about how we can have some questions and engagement on this topic. So the intersection between the music industry and public policy making is something that is really increasing across the spectrum. There are cities wanting to proactively grow their creative economies and attract working creatives. There are also cities experiencing rapid growth and development that ultimately, unfortunately, pushes out working creatives and the critical ecosystem that supports them, such as local independent music venues. Shout out to somebody who's wearing the Exit In sweatshirt. Oh, sorry, there you go, all right. Which can no longer successfully compete against rising rents, redevelopment, displacement, and corporatization. It's not just a problem facing the United States, as I mentioned. It's a global issue. But the solutions really start with successful local synergy between the private and public sectors to align policy with specific goals that creates a healthy, balanced, and thriving creative ecosystem. There are organizations that have popped up over the past several years that are around the world engaging local creative, economic, and cultural leaders to help them guide local policy making. Sound Music Cities, you may have heard of, out of Austin, Texas. Sound Diplomacy over in Great Britain. Our two such organizations, and even universities, have begun to engage in this work, such as Penn Praxis at the Weitzman School of Design at the University of Pennsylvania, who just recently led the study on local independent music venues here in Nashville, which I was honored to secure the funding for. So I first learned of Sound Diplomacy's efforts when I visited Chengdu, China in 2017. The Chinese government mandated that Chengdu become the music city of Asia. Sound Diplomacy hosts events all around the world called Sound Music Cities, where music industry leaders gather with policymakers and they learn from each other's efforts. Suffice to say, it was a fascinating experience to learn of China's strategy for literally manufacturing a music city. I made every effort to strengthen communications about protecting intellectual property through a second trip to Chengdu, where I formed some great relationships that I have still today, and I helped make them a sister city of Nashville so that we can continue those conversations. So let me share a little bit about my story that is kind of hodgepodge, if you will. It wasn't intentional that I got into politics. It wasn't intentional that I really got into policy making. It felt like a natural next step, and it felt like the combination of wearing two hats, if you will. So it's a natural passion for supporting working creatives. That's why I moved to Nashville. With combining politics to help drive the efforts to protect Nashville's global status as Music City. So April 1999, I got my first job at BMI in the mailroom. 1 month later, this thing called Napster came onto the scene, and as we all know, that's what began really the digital revolution. Napster, if you remember, had as many as 80 million users at their height. It was pretty extraordinary to watch the reactions to this. Is it piracy? Is the music industry the bad guys? It was a lot of back and forth, if you remember. The industry almost went into what seemed like kind of a chaotic state. They started suing college kids. But you know, it seemed like it was an intelligence failure in a way of the industry about budding technologies, because the saying goes, copyright will always follow the coattails of technology. But regardless of how it happened, the ripple effects started to impact working songwriters, especially here in Nashville, where we have the greatest per capita songwriters and music industry professionals of any city in the United States. So as the former Tennessean Nate Rao wrote back in those days, Nashville's musical middle class was collapsing. Between 2000 and 2015, the number of full-time songwriters in Nashville plummeted 80%, according to the Nashville Songwriters Association International, NSAI. During that period, between 2000 and 2015, I kind of stumbled into helping my neighborhood association get established. I got involved in either starting or leading nonprofits. I got bit by the bug for community service, if you will. I became president of our local Donaldson Hermitage Chamber of Commerce. And I truly loved it. I was really engaged in community. There was a lot of need. It was going through a natural generational change, and back then I was one of the young guys coming up. And so it felt like a natural next step to run for Metro Council in 2015. Now Nashville has the third largest council in the nation behind New York and Chicago, and we're nonpartisan. That appealed to me. I've never considered myself a career politician. So as I began my campaign, I kept hearing, wow, this is great. We've never had someone from the music industry serve on Metro Council before. Huh? You gotta be kidding me. This is Nashville. Why would you not have any representation from one of the biggest industries in the city? You might wonder why. Well, the reality is that the music industry here in this city really didn't have a need to be too engaged in politics. The music industry was running just fine for many decades. As we all know, politics is a touchy subject when it comes to a lot of artists and the industry itself, especially as we become more polarized. Aligning with a party or a politician might very well mean you're chasing away half your audience sometimes. So I understand and experience this with artists for sure, is that I don't want to get involved too much with politics. I experienced that as a politician. A lot of friends in the music industry. I love you at your BMI job, but let's just keep a distance on that. It's okay, I understand. But again, this is going to be the challenge to you all about how do we successfully engage, because this policy work is critical work for our industry. So by the decade of the 2000s, we saw the rapid decline of a thriving working songwriter and musician ecosystem due to the initial impact of digital technologies and decreasing royalties. But after the Great Recession and the 1,000-year flood that we had in May of 2010, the extraordinary rebound that Nashville had was better than just about any other city in the United States. It was so fast, we couldn't keep up. The rapid growth and development of the 2010 decade then began to further drive a wedge between the haves and the have-nots. And as Nashville successfully courted well-paying industries such as tech, healthcare, advanced manufacturing, and corporate relocations, the ultimate negative impact was that those high-paying jobs and the housing we were building for them was starting to push out the very special and unique culture that had been organically created here that made Nashville what it was. Unintended consequences, to say the least. So just like technology was leaving copyright choking in the dust of catching up to it and negatively impacting working songwriters and musicians, so was Nashville's growth, which was a 1-2 punch to the gut of those who truly make Nashville a music city, as well as those moving here to chase their dreams to be part of the very special fabric that is Nashville. So when I took office in 2015, one of the first things many musicians, especially those down on Lower Broadway, reached out to me about was parking. Many took, or still to this day, take $100 gigs down on Lower Broadway. Sometimes they have to pay $30 to park. So if that's the case, they don't want to be taking those gigs anymore. That becomes difficult. But these kinds of simple quality of life issues were the beginning, and they were beginning to increase for our working creatives in this town, and I felt an increasing pull to do something about them and, again, ensure our long-term status of being not just welcoming to musicians, but the place where they can thrive. So over the course of the 8 years in elected office, I worked to try to turn a reactive situation into a proactive one. I learned quickly that Nashville was not alone. Cities across the globe were going through the same thing in the negative impacts of rapid growth and development. So, as they say, the speed of government. You can only do so much in a certain amount of time. We have term limits. I was in there for 8 years. I loved it as a job. I focused on 2 things. One was the most egregious crack in Nashville's music ecosystem, especially because of the pandemic, was the threat to our local independent music venues. They are the foundational incubators of talent and are intrinsically linked to the chain of success upwards for all our working creatives. I secured both private and public funding, and Penn Praxis won the bid and published an online study that I'm happy, if you want to reach out to me and email me, I'm happy to send you a link to that study. It's 180 pages. It's extraordinary. This kind of data had never been done before. The other focus then was creating stable infrastructure. Again, the music industry didn't have much of a need really to engage with politics and figure out an infrastructure that combined private and public sectors to work on things like improving job to pipeline initiatives for our industry, affordable housing for creatives, small business support like our local independent venues, and any other element needed to ensure that our ecosystem is not fragile, but is strong and sustainable over the next 70 years, which we had built organically over the last 70 or so. Thus, the Nashville Music, Film, and Entertainment Commission was formed. So when I left office last year, our mayor appointed me to the commission where I now serve. So less than a year old, again, the speed of government, we're finally creating a foundation of bylaws, we've secured a budget, and we finally are just that close to having a job description of the first commission's director. So to effectuate good policy, you must have data. Like I mentioned, the local independent music venue study, to have data to try to figure out how do you create effective policies. So in addition to the independent venue study that I mentioned, the Nashville region, meaning not just Nashville-Davidson County, but all of Middle Tennessee, recently went through a greater Nashville music census that was led by Sound Music Cities of Austin. Again, we need data. We need to show how rapid growth and development has impacted songwriters. We need data to make policy so that we can recommend good programs that ultimately use tax dollars in an effective and responsible way. So it was basically the Sound Music City study that was looking at basic strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And ironically, the study is going to be launched today at noon at 3rd and Lindsley, one of our other iconic local independent music venues. So if you just even Google or if you want to email me, I can send you a link. But those results will go live today. Sound Music Cities has now done this for a number of cities across this country. Again, going back to what I said earlier about those trying to increase their creative ecosystem and be attractive to working creatives, and those of us like Austin and Nashville who are trying to say, whoa, our rapid growth and development has a dual-edged sword, and we are starting to chase out our working creatives. So Nashville, we have a problem, and we need to fix it. So I hope that got your brain turning a bit this morning. I hope you're starting to think about wherever city that you are, what's going on in your local community. Is it a place where working creatives are not just welcome, but they can thrive? And then especially those of you here in Nashville, I hope you will follow us on the commission about our work. I hope you will engage with us. I hope you will challenge us. And maybe you too, especially if you live in Davidson County, one day can become one of the commissioners. So I thank you very much, and I would love to take some questions and comments from you. Stunned in silence. Yes, ma'am.
What are some of the cities you see leading the charge and trying to build creative communities that look like Nashville?
Sure. So the question was, where do you see some of the cities that are leading the charge to do what Nashville is wanting to do? When I was looking at creating an entity, like the commission, if you will, it was looking at, just like you say, what are the cities that have done it right? I think about New York City. They have the mayor's office of music and entertainment. They've had that for a number of years. It's gone through a few different evolutions, but they are successfully engaging private and public sectors. When I made my trip over to China, I learned from a lot of different cities over in Europe, who, especially not just with like a commission, but also like the Office of Nightlife. Like here in Nashville, it's about a year and a half old or so. It's still being incubated, if you will. But the mayor's Office of Nightlife, as the economies grow, what happens? You're becoming a 24/7 economy. Well, all your government offices, they go home at 5 o'clock. Well, so who is managing Lower Broadway and whatnot? Public safety, codes, all these different issues about making sure that it's a thriving environment for creatives. So it's a combination of the entities that are successful within policy making, but also I would say the Office of Nightlife are just as critically important. So cities in Europe, I think, are definitely ahead of us. I've always said Austin was about 4 or 5 years or so ahead of us, which I love because we're always learning from Austin. They have a program now where they are starting to support local independent music venues with rent support and whatnot. Nashville's not there yet, but we needed it to be there several years ago, unfortunately, but we'll get there.